fact that we've had such intense 2 days, and this day promises to be the third very intense day, and of course the fourth tomorrow. Today is the biodiversity. Yes, can you hear me? Huh? So today is the Forest and Biodiversity Day. Yesterday we had termed it the Climate Day. And as you can see over the program that we have designed, the whole idea was to really, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use this word, but I hope you understand why, we're sort of bombarding you with all sorts of information. And the idea is just so that, we know how skilled and how good journalists you are. You know how to shift out information. You know how to decide on different views. Mic not working? No? I mean, I have such a buland आवाज, किसी को पता ही नहीं चलेगा कि मेरी माइक
आपकी आवाज खूब सुनाई पड़ रही है।
बिल्कुल, हाँ, मेरी तो बहुत बुलंद है आवाज। I could challenge any politician on screaming. तो आज का दिन is the Forest Day, and when we designed this program, we designed it keeping in mind we want to share what is happening, but also what are the flashpoints? Because obviously as journalists, for us, flashpoints become the way for inquiry, for writing, and then for taking forward issues. So as you will see today, the day has been very carefully organized so that in the morning, we are going to discuss a very recently released report of the government on the state of forests. And we are very grateful that we have two very extraordinary people with us, Madhusudan. Madhu actually got the whole discussion on the state of forests report started because of some very interesting research he did to raise issues. And the idea with all this is to basically bring out concerns so that we can find solutions. None of us, we are too old in this game to do these things just out of poking fun out of people. That's not our interest. So we have Madhu. We have Dr. Pramod Kant. Dr. Kant is a forester, so he will bring us also some views as a forester. But he's also someone who has done some very interesting research on the timber issue in India, something we never talk about. And that's particularly why we asked him to join. And I have then my colleague Avantika Goswami. Avantika has been working on the climate and forest connection, and we will bring that discussion to you this morning. We then have a very interesting session as well, which is where we want to, now the second session is more to join the dots. The first session is to tell you straight on, this is a report of the government recently. What are the different views around it? And what is the challenge and the issues of forestry in the country? The second session is much more of a, if you can call it a more philosophical, but a more of a session to help you to join the dots as you go on. Because today the issue of agriculture is absolutely critical, and we know that. But there are also very important connections that we must make in agriculture. The diet connection, the diet and biodiversity connection, the tree and agriculture connection, the manure connection with methane, climate change. So there are a lot of new areas that we must start exploring. And we will share with you, my colleague Amit Khurana will share with you what CSE is beginning to do. And we are not taking, in this second session, we are not saying we know, but we are beginning to look at all the linkages. And again, we are very fortunate. We have some very interesting and very well-informed speakers to come and help us in exploring these links. We have Dr. V.B. Mathur. Dr. Mathur is the chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority, has been working at the Wildlife Institute, head of the Wildlife Institute for many years. And he really will help us to understand the agriculture and biodiversity connection. We then have Ramu, who most of you would know from Andhra Pradesh. I mean, a man who spent all his life looking at sustainable agriculture and help us to understand the agriculture connection from the point of view of toxins, livelihood of farmers, natural farming, organic farming. We have Dr. Nandakumar, who was the former secretary, who is really well informed on the politics and the policies of agriculture and where they need to go. And then we have Arvind Padi from the ICRISAT. Now, dryland agriculture, critical, biodiversity, critical, smallholder agriculture, critical. So what is ICRISAT thinking about it? We then have a session in the afternoon on the great extinction. And the reason we wanted you to understand this is because really this is becoming something that even I missed, and I try not to miss, but I missed. And my colleague Richard has been hassling, saying we really need to understand the scale of extinction that is happening. And we need to get a handle on what is that scale. Now, Richard will help us. He's not here, but he will join and give us an overview. But then we are very fortunate that the director of ZSI, Dr. Banerjee, has agreed to give us an overview. We were trying very hard to find Indian scientists who have the big picture on extinction. And Dr. Banerjee is one of them. And we're hoping that we will hear from her on this. I think she's back from the Andamans, so otherwise connectivity will be a problem. And then the hottest issue on this, then again, I'm going back to Flashpoint. The hottest issue for all of us is the Biodiversity Amendment Act. It's in the Select Parliamentary Committee. And what are the pros and cons? And this time we really want you to understand, we ourselves don't know. So my colleague Vibha has spent lots of time to just get to understand issues kya hai, which we will present. But then we have some very interesting speakers which will help us to dissect the bill. We have Dr. Hem Pandey, Mr. Hem Pandey. Hem was the Special Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, head of the GAC, the genetic that authority of, and then also moved to become the head of the Biodiversity Authority, and very passionate about biodiversity, but as a bureaucrat, and understands the issues and the challenges he faced on the issue of sharing biodiversity knowledge. Shalini Bhutani is a lawyer, so will help us to understand the legal issues. And then we have Dr. Ramanathan, who actually is now, so Hem is on one side, and then we have Dr. Ramanathan on the other side. Shalini is the lawyer in between, to help us to really look at why the Ayurvedic companies want this amendment. And I think it's important to listen to both sides. I mean, we're journalists, we have to make up our mind ourselves, but we have to listen to both sides. And very grateful that he agreed to come. Most times we are finding people on this side actually balk at coming because they sort of say, "Ki, hum baat nahi karna chahte." So we have a very exciting day. And I want to spend the evening on the bonfire again. So let's try and get it over in time, so we are not so exhausted and we can actually have a bit of a session. So Pramodji, that's the day, just to give you an idea. I'm now going to launch into my short presentation. Yeah. All of you have a copy of the magazine. I have to tell you people, मैंने बहुत दिन बाद story करी. So my biggest joy in life is to research and write. It gives me, there's no other pleasure I get as much as getting in depth into an issue and writing it. It was Avantika and I were working on the paper on sinks. And she sent me, we were looking at the India story on sinks. And I had a sort of 2 hours and I told my office, FSI के report को print करते हैं. I'm very old. I can't do this scanning on a computer and make sense of it. And I started reading, I was blown by the questions that I had. And I want to present some of them to you. The issue is in the back. I think you've put the issue in the forest issues in everybody's kit, or the next issue was in the kit. Doesn't matter. The entire issue is outside. If anyone wants more, I will take very short. So this is the down-to-earth issue. We called it Missing, and the magazine is available if anyone finds it. It's also downloadable. I persuaded Richard to allow me to download of the magazine, which is a very tough one because we lose subscribers, but so we do have it. So essentially, when I look deep into the state of forest report, what came out is that India is missing 25.87 million hectares of forests. Now, this is not a small figure. This is the size of Uttar Pradesh. Now, why do I say it is missing? Because there is a recorded forest in India, which is given in the FSI report, the amount of land held by the Forest Department, which is reserve forest, protected forest, and other forests. And you add that up, and in their own report that says, they say it's 77.53 million hectares. But when they produce the data in terms of forest cover, the forest cover inside recorded forest area is only 51.66 million hectares. What they do not explain anywhere in the report, and मैं चाटती हूँ चीजों को, मैंने पूरी तरह से रिपोर्ट को चाटी है, कहीं पर explanation नहीं है कि वो 25, which is 77 million hectares of land under the Forest Department, and what is the 51 million hectares which has got forest cover. Where is this difference of 25.87 million hectares? It could be a very brave forester has written to me a few days ago, obviously very unhappy about my analysis, but he has given me an account of 11 million hectares, saying कि 3 million hectare encroached है, 8 million hectare forest village के अंदर है, 2 million hectare divert हो गया है, but ये report में कहाँ है? और अगर ये, if this is really the case, then shouldn't we know about it? How can you leave such a major fact out of it? Okay. And as we say, this is the size of the state of Uttar Pradesh. Okay. 77 million hectares under the Forest Department, 51 million hectares or 51.66 million hectares is all we can give an account for. 34% of the area classified as forest land is missing in the assessment. This is the data. What I find is, take a look at this. Reserve forest with forest area, reserve forest without forest area, we don't know, okay? Now, it could be argued that this has always been missing. Now, me being me, I went back to the 1987 report of the State of Forest Survey. We have it in our library, so I'm very fortunate that we have a collection of all the reports. Now, from the first report to now, and if you see the magazine, you will see we put a table there on report after report. What did it say? The total forest area was always around 20 to 23% of the land area of the country, around 70 million hectares. Now, you could very much argue that after a particular point, which is 2015 onwards, that's when the report starts making this distinction, that the Forest Department got digitized boundaries of the forest. Now the Forest Department has supplied FSI कि हमारी जमीन कहाँ है, और जहाँ वो data नहीं है, FSI says it is used something called greenwashing, which is taking the land survey of India maps, and what has said is green, they have classified it. So they now know कि forest की जमीन कौन सी है, and that adds up to 77 million. And now they are saying that उसमें से 51 million hectares के ऊपर forest है, but they don't tell you कि बाकी के में क्या है. So you could argue that पहले भी जंगल नहीं थे, पहले भी बाहरी थे जंगल, forest की जमीन में नहीं थे. That's okay. But it still leaves unanswered the question, what is the state of that land? Why? How can we avoid answering that question? So if you look at it today, the trees outside forest, now the Forest Survey of India, and Madhu will talk a lot about that, so I don't want to get into it. Forest Survey of India has a definition for trees outside forest, where they count individual trees. And you must read their report. It's actually a brilliant report which even tells you कि नीम का growing stock इस country में कितना है, mango का growing stock कितना है इस country में, and the mango growing stock is equivalent to the pine growing stock in this country. It's fascinating. Okay, so there's individual trees counted, and then they count forest cover outside the forest recorded forest area. When they say forest cover, it means any area with 10% or more trees in 1 hectare of land. And Madhu will explain that much more, what is the twist in that story. But the bottom line of that then becomes that the total area outside the forest, usme se trees outside forest, is 9.6 million hectares, equivalent to the dense forest of this country. And 19.72 million hectares is forest cover outside. दोनों को ऐड कर लीजिए तो you get around 29 के करीब. मैं थोड़ा जल्दी बोल रही हूँ, but वो मैगजीन में है सब कुछ. So, I don't, you will understand it all. I want to show you this. All of you are from different states. Please take a look at this. Chhattisgarh. Okay, Chhattisgarh में 29% of the forest land is missing. Now, you could argue, what I was told is, madam, आपको पढ़ना नहीं आता कि ये तो जंगल नहीं थे कभी भी, ये तो स्नोर के अंडर लैंड था, पानी के अंडर लैंड था. मैंने कहा ठीक है, हो सकता है, मैंने भी देखा है कि वो स्नो कवर, above a particular range could be lost in Jammu and Kashmir, all that. But Chhattisgarh में इतना difference? I mean, I'm sure it is land. I mean, you say it is under you, but where is it? Okay, Andhra Pradesh is 35%. Okay, West Bengal 40%. Now I know, Jayanto, you would spun a story कि वो तो सुंदरबन में खो गया. Okay, ओशन में खो गया. ठीक है, बता दो भाई. मैं नहीं कह रही हूं कि वो कहीं आपने चोरी करी है. I'm not saying that. I respect foresters a lot. I'm not saying वो land kind. In fact, I know they're the most territorial people. They would have held on to their land. And now by the Forest Rights, Forest Conservation Act, foresters are really duty bound not to allow any diversion to happen. And they're under a lot of pressure not to allow diversion. So I'm very clear that they are doing that. But where is this? And that really, if you look at this, this is the story that we have asked. Now, at the end, therefore, what is the forest cover of India and how much? If you look at dense forests, which is 70% canopy and above, you have about 10% of 9.898 million hectares, which is under. If you look at it, how much of it is in tribal area? It's very interesting to understand this. 73% of the total dense forest of this country is found in the 200 and some tribal areas classified by the FSI. It is 3% of India's geographical area. It is 14% of the total forest cover inside and outside reserve forests, because dense forests are also found outside reserve forests. But 73% of this, what we call the most important forests of India, are found within tribal districts. 60% of the moderately dense forests, now this is a very broad range of 40 to 70% canopy cover. So it could be 40, it could be 70, okay? So it's also a very important part of our forests, okay? Is 60% in tribal areas and open forests. Now, the other data that is very clear is that if you look at what has changed over the years, you will find that forest cover outside reserve forest, now I'm comparing 2019 to 2021, the change is really in what you would category here, 1.62% change. This is all now in million hectares. One of the things we really need to teach people is don't mix square kilometers with million hectares. कहीं पर square kilometers है, कहीं पर million hectares है, उसको समझना, समझाना, it takes a huge effort. So it's one of the challenges, but this is really what the real story is. Now, what are we therefore suggesting as the agenda for forests? Number one, clearly we need to protect the very dense and ecologically significant forests in India. Now, this is a very crucial thing. And I think the one thing that we should feel good about is that there is no sign of degradation of the very dense forests over the years. If you look at the 1987 to now report, we have dense forests, and earlier on we didn't have a category of moderately dense and dense. Then they broke it up into moderately dense and dense. The overall percentage remains the same, roughly. I mean, there'll be some ups and downs, but it remains. That's a good thing. We should feel good about it. But we now need to make sure that this gets protected under all costs. And what I'm arguing is that we really need to now talk seriously about ecosystem payments, that the Finance Commission had brought in the compensatory payments for states which were holding forests. That entire process has got diluted. From the NK Singh report, it is unconditional. It's going into the exchequer of state governments. It needs to be brought back, and that money has to go to communities along with the forest department. So you need to bring back the concept of ecosystem payments. Secondly, instead of just focusing on afforestation outside the forest land, saying हमें 33% करना है, 23% हमारे पास है, 10% बाहर है, वहां पर हमें बाहर करना है. Now we know that the forest department land itself, we don't have an account for it. So we are saying we need to focus on what is the state of that forest land, and if it is available, that's where the focus of regeneration has to be. And for that, again, because you have the Forest Rights Act, you have the Community Forest Act, you need to start talking about how you can reinvent JFM so that it is truly one in which people benefit. And at some point in the evening, maybe we can discuss this further, because it's a really serious issue, what needs to happen. But the third thing, now this is a controversial issue, because this is an issue on which a lot of people who maybe, the conservationists will argue with me that you are actually sounding the death knell of our forests. I am saying we need to stop the license raj over trees now. It's time we actually decided that we need to do sustainable harvesting of our trees. This whole phobia that we have, ki ped mat kaato, means that you're pushing the country into an unsustainable mode of using cement or aluminum or steel. We need to look at forests as areas which need to be grown, cut, and regrown. The problem is not to cut, the problem is to regrow. Given the huge livestock pressure in India, we know that. So that's the strategy that we need to focus on. And right now, there is such a maze of conditions that restrict people from growing trees, from cutting trees, and from transporting trees. Now, I have had very anguished letters from foresters saying that this will destroy India's forests, because once you allow people to take trees without our transit pass, हमारे जंगल कट के वो लोग बेचेंगे. मगर we need to find solutions over this. I mean, 4 years ago, now 11 years ago, I fought, Jairam Ramesh owed me some favors, and I really fought with him to get the bamboo classified as a grass. It was a very tough battle. Then the thing came ki bamboo to grass ho gaya, magar we won't give you a transit pass to carry the bamboo outside. Then we came up with a thing, and we went to Gadchiroli and we said, if you're a CFA, community forest, then you can do so. But even that has not happened. So, and Mr. Kant will tell you, what is the crisis of wood in this country? Listen, we have used wood at AATI because I will use more wood than steel at any time. But I want sustainably, I want wood to grow, and I want wood to be cut. I want houses made out of wood. The whole wood-based economy has to come back, but in a way that it benefits people and a way that it's sustainable. And that's the toughest message to give, because even as an environmentalist, it becomes very tough to say this, because you're almost saying ki jungle kaato. Magar main keh rahi hu jungle kaato bhi, par lagao bhi. And that's a tough message. So I'm going to end that, and I'm going to ask Madhu to come in now to give his presentation. You'll have to use this, Madhu, I think, right? Oh, it's too complicated. Then you have to handle it. I don't know. Okay, I can take questions or I can ask Mr. Kant to go. He's
No,
really
I need this transition 2 minutes in any time. Any point.
So let's tell Mr. Kant then. Can we just tell him this? So,
Yes, I've been hearing you and I can go now to my
नहीं
presentation.
प्रमोद जी प्रॉब्लम ये है कि मधु को 2-3 मिनट चाहिए उसको यही कंप्यूटर चाहिए so you're going to get off for 2 minutes while
Okay,
he's
fine.
organizing
Fine.
it so just
Okay.
give us 2 minutes sorry Pramod ji
Perfectly fine.
so I will take questions yes
So, one usual deforestation plan.
where you planted and what you planted and who benefited. So there are 3 other questions that we need to ask. Now, if you are replacing virgin or dense forest with eucalyptus, you're in I cannot use another word. Okay? But if you're planting a eucalyptus on land that is otherwise degraded, and I have seen incredible tissue culture eucalyptus plantation coming up in Andhra Pradesh, primarily for paper cultivation, paper use. Okay? So I think we need to have, and my request for all of you is a more nuanced view of this whole issue. Otherwise, we are falling into the trap of I will have to take it later. Now Madhu's ready. Okay, I'm here. And Shaham is going to be a very, I'm not letting anything be done. Okay, Bob.
Which is why I said don't take that mic, that computer off. I was only going to share my screen. No, which is, I asked him not to take that laptop off. No, don't put the audio back into this, whatever this is, the audio range.
Sorry, Madhu, there's
No.
third day we are now, even our systems are saying, bas karo.
Audio.
No, I'll take yes. No, Madhu, say no. Sorry.
Yeah, you should, but you just share your screen only.
Yeah, this is what I have done. So that's to unmute.
So can you done? मुझे check कर लो आवाज आ रही है सब कुछ we have a lot of people joining online from all over, so that's why this is a very complicated operation of the speaker outside plus broadcast. So no, this will also happen. Just give us a minute. Bolo.
What am I? Can you? I'm muted now. It's fine. I'm muted.
But you cannot ignore the fact that there is a large tree. There is an issue of plantation is going to happen. Why obviously it's because of forest in the same language as one of the used for plantation.
So very good question. I want to answer that. So Madhu will also, I'm sure, discuss it. I do want to answer it. Okay. So that's what we have to dispel. The issue of why separate has to be together. Madhu, please.
I hope audio both here and everywhere else is fine. So thank you so much to Sunita and everyone else at CSE. Is it working?
Madhu, I think it's your height.
Is
You have to speak a little closer.
I would.
We have designed everything for my height. Anything about me, it doesn't matter.
I like it. It's working? Working?
Nobody will have any.
Yeah? All okay? Your flight checks?
You can go ahead. You can start.
Okay. Yeah. So, yes, thanks to everyone at CSE and to Sunita especially, and to all of you for being here and giving me this chance to share my thoughts with you today. I think what I would like to do, taking away from the summary that Sunita gave you about the forest cover assessments in relation to forest area, is, and she concluded with 3 points on an agenda. And what I would really like to do is to point out that the larger implication of this for me is that forests are contested landscapes. They are the richest repositories on land for biodiversity. They are stocks of vast resources, both above and below the ground on which they are, which are keenly competed over by a very wide set of stakeholders. These are living landscapes. These are cultural landscapes. They are homes. They are homesteads. So they are very, very complicated, just in terms of the scope of what goes on in a forest. These are highly contested landscapes. I think, therefore, how you choose to define them, how you choose to measure them, is a very important thing because it is the fuel to the political contestation. It is what the political battles over forest are kindled by the fuel of these definitions and assessments that we do. So they are not inert numbers. It's not that they don't mean anything. So the numbers, what we call a forest, how we measure it, is going to matter a lot. And I'll try to point out 2 or 3 ways in which that matters. So what I was trying to do here is to see how do we measure our forests? Are we counting? What counts? So recently, there's a committee set up by the Supreme Court to look at, advise it on tree protection and more broadly on conservation. They submitted their report recently, and in that report, they said, right at the beginning, national forest reports that are published periodically depict an increasing forest cover for the country. While these reports create a feel-good factor, it is crucial to know if the canopy cover of the native forest trees is really increasing. So this is not me, this is an important committee set up by the Supreme Court, which said this in its report to the Supreme Court. So what reports is it talking about that is periodically depict an increasing forest cover in this country? So these are the state of forest reports published by the Forest Survey of India. They've been published since 1987. Sunita mentioned them. There are 17 of them right now. And I'll get straight to the headline point from these reports, which is the extent of forest cover we in India have. Now, forest cover is not the same as forest area. So there are many, many subtleties. Sunita's already pointed you to those. But at this point, what we see is that until the end of the 90s, our forests are not doing anything terribly interesting. And all of a sudden, between the 1999 assessment and the 2001 assessment, 2 years, an area of the extent of Kerala, 38,000 square kilometers, is the extent by which the forest cover reported therein changes. So this is the big change that happens. So my instinct when I look at time series data on forests, I'm an ecologist, when I look at multiple years of data for the whole expanse of a country and so on, the first thing I would really like to do is to go verify it against a sanity example, which is a place where we have known extensive and rapid deforestation to have occurred over the last 3 decades, which is a place called Sonitpur in Assam. It saw a very large extent of deforestation within a rapid, which happened very rapidly. So I'd like to go and see, and this is basically what that looks like. This is the change that happened, as you can see. So if you have a report that's talking about what's happened to our forests across the entire country and is able to disaggregate it to the level of a pixel, surely it has a story to tell from Sonitpur, right? So this report has something to tell us about Sonitpur. So I wanted to look at the trend in forest cover in Sonitpur from the State of Forest Survey reports to see if, so what happened in that big increase? So this is a place where, we've lost forests. So what does the report show us? So this is what the report showed us, that between 1999 and 2001, it rose by 44% and then kind of bounced around very minimally, and nothing very major happened after that. But I think we need to look at the map along with the number. So often we get completely misled by numbers. Numbers need not tell us complete stories. So many of us are pushed into situations where we are saying, have the number in very dense forest changed to moderately dense and all of those kinds of things. If you're only going to keep looking at numbers, numbers are not the data. The numbers in the reports are summaries, they're aggregations, they're representations of the data, they're not the data itself. The map in a situation like this, the map is where the data is. The number is not the data. The report is not the data. So I took the numbers from the report and the maps, put them side by side, and here is what you see. So for every change that takes place, so 1999, this is what the map looked like. And I want you to pay attention to those areas which I have encircled and see what happens there. There are 2 places to pay attention to. One is the map and the other is the graph. So if a forest disappears here, you expect that number to go down. Okay, that's what should happen. See what happens.
Can you go back once to the transition?
Unfortunately, the animation, the way it's set up, it'll take me all the way back. I can play it back to you at the end. I can try, but it'll just, okay. I'll have to do all of this again, but that's fine. Okay, now that you know the drill, pay attention to, this is 1999. Pay attention into, so yeah, can you see that? Okay, so the forests are disappearing. This is in 1999, just to kind of give you the aggregate picture over that entire 20-year period. This is the picture in 1999. And this is what it becomes in 2019. If you couldn't catch that transition, there is this, which shows you all the red is where the forest was lost. Green is where forest increased. This is what the map tells you. You know what the overall thing basically represented a 44% increase in forest cover in this area over this identical period.
It's not just browning.
It's loss. It's not degradation. It's not change in quality of forest. It's replacement, stand level replacement of forests. So what is interesting is while the FSI was doing this, just a few kilometers away in Dehradun, another institution, the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing run by the Department of Space, people were in 2000 were writing a paper in Current Science saying there is massive deforestation going on in Sonitpur. I'll give you a reference for that. So it is not that this was not being observed. Other people interested in forests, other agencies that were doing recording at the same point that an increase was being represented in one assessment. There were other people from the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing saying there is a massive and very alarming increase in deforestation in this area 1 year after the biggest changes occurred. So they wrote immediately in a paper in Current Science. So basically what we got from our ISFR assessments is a 33,800 hectare increase. Whereas if you looked at what the assessment IIRS did, they reported a 34,400, They reported a huge loss. So essentially the problem is for that to actually happen, there's a twice the extent of actual increase in forest cover that should have led to this. So what I wanted to do is then ask, what are they counting as forests? So when I started to look at that, this was an FSI map that I got. Here I have to stop and say, FSI doesn't make its maps public. The reports are public. The map data are not public. So we have an excellent geospatial data policy that was made last year. And under that, just last week, an incredibly vast and repository of data was released under the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana about rural landscapes and so on. It's extraordinary. And I think this attitude of how public data must become more publicly accessible must include what happens with our forest covers, but unfortunately it doesn't. So I just happened to find on a Government of India server the data from FSI maps, which allowed me to show you what I'm going to share with you right now. So the tables exist, the reports exist, but the data don't exist in the public domain, unfortunately. And that is what I think we really need to make sure changes. So the area in the forest cover maps that I saw, the area in the central region didn't show as forests. But yet in the Forest Survey of India maps, that area is showing us forests. So I wanted to take a closer look at that landscape. When I zoom in, I see the town of Rangapara. And I see everything around the town of Rangapara showing as forests in the FSI map. So they're all tea estates. So this is how I discovered that these are tea estates that are being called forests. So, but mistakes do happen. When you undertake a task of this enormity, it's not easy to do everything perfectly. And I think we must recognize that and see if these are, genuine mistakes that any of us could be making. I think that's the courtesy we owe any data set and any analysis. So then I started to look at other places. So this is in the nearby region of Naxalbari, again in North Bengal. And so for people saying very dense, all of those things are meaningful and important, here is a landscape of tea estate where you have very dense forest, moderately dense, and open forest all occurring within tea. So I think we should be a little more circumspect about what meaning we attach to these words. We have our own mental images of what a very dense forest is. But on the map, this is what a very dense forest could look like. This is not every place which has very dense forests. Then I started to look at other tea landscapes. Maybe there is some problem with tea, which makes it hard to classify. And I looked at other tea landscapes. And in Valpara in Tamil Nadu, again, all of this is classified, all of it is classified as forest. Then I went a little north of Valpara into the coconut groves of Pollachi in the plains, hot plains of Tamil Nadu. These are private coconut plantations, all of which show as open to moderately dense forest. Then, since I saw coconut, I said, maybe I should look at Lakshadweep. Then I went to Lakshadweep, which has 95% forest cover. I've been to Lakshadweep, and so may have some of you. There is no forest in Lakshadweep. These are areas of coconut, and this place has 22,000 people per square kilometer. It has among the highest 3,000 people per square kilometer, among the highest densities, almost comparable to many urban agglomerations. And these are lived places. People live here. The coconut all around. It's not dense forest, but this is what we are counting. So then I said, if this is happening to inhabited areas, let's try and actually look at a city. And this is Calcutta. This is in the suburban areas of Calcutta. All of these areas are under green, showing us forest. And this is what we are counting under forest as well. So I said, if this is happening to Calcutta, let's look at Delhi. So I looked at Delhi, and then I found, for all of you, I mean, this would be familiar to many of you, Akbar Road is moderately dense forest, in case you didn't know. So this is what we are currently counting. Those numbers hide all of this. And this is, I didn't make this up. So eventually I said, if this is what we are counting as forest, is it possible that a desert also has some forests? I thought it mostly as something that is improbable and looked. And here it is. I assure you, in Jaisalmer, this is an area. It looks like that. And that's what it looks like when you zoom in. That is also open forest. So this is what we are calling forest. And we also have to look at what the implication of this when we count something else as forest. We have this invasive species called Prosopis that has been responsible for a large obliteration of very rich and diverse grasslands on which millions of pastoral communities depend. And when you go, and this is in the Banni of Gujarat. So you look at areas that are under Prosopis, which is an invasive. It's not even a native species. It's invading and destroying grasslands, and we're counting those as forests. We're kind. So I think we then have to get to the point of, so there is a large technical side to this, and I'm not going to get into that, but it's still a question that must be asked. Is there a technical difficulty in classifying forests with other things that might or might not look like a forest? It might seem egregious in the instance of deserts, but maybe in other places, it's actually not very easy. So we have to then compare this is an FSI map. So here is a landscape where it is showing T in Valparai as open forest. That's an area of actual forest in the Annamalai Tiger Reserve, which is being shown as forest. And that's coconut being shown as forest. This is in the FSI map. Now, what does another agency of the government, the National Remote Sensing Agency, which makes national land use, land cover maps, how do they do it? Their maps are able to, with no problem, they're able to distinguish this as plantation, these two as plantations and those as forests. No problem. There is no difficulty. So one must assume that there is a choice involved in what you're deciding to call forest. It's not a technical constraint that you're calling something a forest, because analysis is very difficult. This is an active choice being made to call coconut and tea as forests. So now let me kind of step back and ask why some of these changes happened. So if you look at our forest cover over this initial period up to 1999, nothing terribly interesting happened. And actually, it was quite remarkable when you look at it in hindsight, that the minister's foreword to the 1997 report actually says that the country forest cover has decreased by 5,500 square kilometers, and there's a degradation of another 18,000 square kilometers. This is the headline. This is what is in the minister's foreword to the report, that we were able to acknowledge what was going on. If there was a decrease, we stated there was a decrease, and then we had to pick up our, ourselves by the bootstrings and go further. Then this is when the really big change happened. So there's a technical side to this. We used to do a lot of this using printed satellite imageries and manually tracing things. That changed, and we went digital in 2000. So the 2001 assessment on which that is based, everything was done digital. So pixels were assigned to whether they were forests or not, of what kind. So it was done entirely in a digital workflow. And by and large, we have this feeling that if something is digital, it's better. And that's the, which is not completely and always true. And then the reason we went digital was that it minimizes subjectivity, enables delineation of small areas. We can get areas as low as 1 hectare as having forest cover can be included. It was for accuracy. We were making the change because we said, this is better and our maps will become more accurate as a result. And that was what the report said was the reason why we were doing this. And it also said, I'm not going to read this out, but basically it says that all lands with discernible tree canopy, irrespective of species, land use and ownership, have been included in forest cover assessment. So now we just widened our embrace and picked up everything that looked like a forest, regardless of who owned it, what grew on it, and what the actual use of the place was. We decided to pick all of that up in our embrace of what was a forest. And after that, it just continued. Because if you cut down a forest and grow tea, there is no word to describe it. Earlier, you could call it deforestation. Now it is forest before and forest after. What do you call it? You lost the vocabulary to describe change that is going on in our forests. If you cut natural forests and plant oil palm, you cannot say there is deforestation because there is no change. In 2 years, oil palm can grow to be counted as forest under this definition. This is not a joke. In 2 years, you can cut and replace at the stand level, and you won't be able to detect deforestation. So this is a big problem. So, and this has not gone unnoticed. Many other assessments that have been going on tell you that India and China lead greening of the world, but India's change is mostly from croplands with a minor contribution from forests. So most of the greening that you see in India is change in croplands. And this is the NRS's trend on plantation cover in India over time. If you look at the FAO's Global Forest Resources Assessment of 2020, it says that between 1990 and 2020, that is in 30 years, naturally regenerating forests increased only marginally by 6,700 square kilometers. Plantations increased by 75,500 square kilometers. So 92% of India's so-called forest cover increase between 1990 and 2020 has been via plantations. This is not me saying it. This is from the FAO's Global Forest Resources Assessment of 2020, to which the government contributes data. So has nobody else been assessing forests? What are they saying? This is what the India State of Forest report says. What are others saying? What are other government agencies saying? I told you that IIRS was already sounding alarm bells when the State of Forest report was showing increases in Sonitpur. They are saying forests are being lost here. What are other reports saying? So if you look at the land use land cover data set, which the NRSE makes available publicly, you see that this is not the trend that is the blue line is completely different from the red line, which is the State of Forest reports. In fact, it is probably even going down a little bit over time. If you look at another amazing paper that was published in 2016 by where all the authors were from the National Remote Sensing Agency, they looked at it from even earlier. There were places where they began with similar baselines, as you can see with the green line. And over time, The state of forest report has completely diverged from the rest of the assessment. And the kind of authoritative paper on forest cover was published in 2013 by someone called Matt Hansen and a group of other people. And if you look at their data set, what's happening to India's forest cover is somewhere else completely. So these are other data sets which unfortunately don't even get acknowledged. It would be a lovely thing to have a state of forest of India, state of forest report, which takes on other reports and shows where you can meet the challenge and show where they are wrong and you're better. That is hopefully how science progresses. But unfortunately, no reference is made to any of these other data sets. So I think coming back to where we began, of forests as contested spaces, we have to ask the question, every representation has a certain benefit and cost associated with it. And there is a whole politics of representation. And in this, where are the gains? And we also therefore have to ask, where are the pains of this? I'll try to give you a glimpse into three things that I think are very important, and I'll end there. So we are very interested in getting on the carbon gravy train, and we want to be, if there is money going to be made from reduced deforestation, from addition of carbon and through sequestration as forests, there's money to be made there. We may stand a good chance if we keep saying our forests are increasing. Maybe we are in the run to be able to get some money. But then it's not ourselves. We can all be confused by what convinced by what our government says, but not everyone may be as convinced. And that's a place where having really good data and doing a good job of our assessments becomes really important, because otherwise we stand the embarrassment of having to be told your data is just not up to speed. So if we are interested, I think we need to do a good job. Oops, I don't know why this. I'm so sorry. I seem to have lost a whole bunch of slides. Let me see. Okay. Okay. So I had two other. Yeah, I had two other points to make, which I'll now make. I don't know where I lost the slides. Yeah. So what I was trying to say is that the second place is that after 1980, we have a law that brought in that regulates forest diversion. Since 1980, CSE did an excellent report on the 30th anniversary or something. Over the last 40 years, we've diverted 20,000 square kilometers of forests under the Forest Conservation Act. So that graph looks like this. I had a graph of one of those. And if you look at a forest cover, that's also a graph that looks like this. So if you're saying, look, we are diverting forests, but our forests are also increasing, then you have all the more reason to keep diverting forests. Except what the forest actually gets diverted may be natural. What actually is replacing it may be a tea plantation or an oil palm plantation, but we're calling them forest. So the fact that we are misrepresenting what a forest is allows us to continue with diversions, even as natural forests are getting replaced by something that are entirely anthropogenic. The final point was that when you do this actually affects biodiversity, which is my really biggest. So you can convince anybody with a definition, but if you are a gibbon, if you are a monkey, if you are a frog, if you are species that depend on a forest, you can't be shown a definition and told this is also forest. These species do not survive there. So when we come to biodiversity, our natural forests are incomparable both in terms of their structure, values, and function from anything else we can define and convince ourselves is a forest. We really have to have our definitions led by biology and an understanding of biodiversity, what it means to a species to lose its entire home and habitat, what it means. And if you are looking at carbon sequestration, natural forests are incomparable to any plantation any human can put in. So when we do this in Sonitpur, I had two examples from Sonitpur. I only happen to have one here right now, which before this I had one saying, after the forest loss, there was a huge explosion in human-elephant conflict. Dozens of elephants have died, dozens of people have died. So the loss of forest and the creation of conflict as a result is a consequence for actual people and wildlife. And if that's not enough, they reported an 8-fold increase in malaria in the areas that showed deforestation. So this is not an inert change only in numbers and maps. These are changes that make huge differences in the lives of countless species and millions of people. So I think it's with that we should really be careful about how we define our forests. And I finally would like to end with this, with one thing, which is that our forests, oops, what has happened? Yeah, our forests are public resources. And this is something that's really important. To understand what is happening to them is key to managing them. They're public resources and we need to have a better understanding. And to do so, data should be the bedrock of our understanding. And those data that give us an understanding of our public resources are a public good. So what I want to conclude is by saying that we need more and better of both of forests and of data about forests. Thank you. I'm sorry.
We now get Pramodji. How do we get him on our?
Yeah, I'll just.
So, Madhu, you take the questions now.
Sure.
One question. Yes, please. We will have time after this. Just one question while we're switching. So, you have your hand up first. Huh? Yes, we can hear.
Tanvi Pandey from India Tech Mumbai.
Thank you. So when you mentioned the loss, rather the gain in forest cover in the ISFRs over the years, just a simple question, isn't ground truthing a part of ISFR process? I mean, maybe this is silly to ask, but if you could go there and see it on the ground, the Forest Survey and the Forest Department has such a massive number of people, right? Couldn't they have gauged this over the years?
If you send them to the field with a definition that a tea plantation can also be a forest, what purpose would ground truthing serve?
See, Tanvi, the main thing I think, where Madhu and I are sort of in sync, and is the definition issue. If you define a forest, you have basically said a forest cover is any land with forest cover of over 10%, okay, in 1 hectare. Once you have taken that definition as forest, then as Madhu said, you can take a tree plantation which would have trees, as you have seen tea plantations, would have trees interspersed.
Yeah. So there is it's a little more complicated than that. I think even the definition that's running around and then the way it's being used is a huge, it draws its origin to a definition that was put out in the FAO, which said it's not saying 10% tree cover in 1 hectare. That's not what it's saying, actually. It's saying that if you use a canopy densiometer and stand at any point, it should be at least 10% under canopy. And then you should have at least a hectare of such area. That is what it's saying. It's not the same thing.
But the definition that is now existing is a very simple definition.
Correct. And that's wrong. If you compare it to the original one. Second, the FAO has an even better, it has many more things. If you go and look at the FAO definition on which we are nominally based, it says these should be trees that will, upon maturity, attain at least 5 meters in stature. So a tea plant can never become a forest under the FAO definition. Third, it says it has an exclusion for agriculture and urban areas. So that is the FAO definition. What we've done is we've said anything that has tree cover in less than 10% or more is a forest, and therefore you ground truth, you will find that it has tree cover.
Okay, now this is a very interesting debate and it's going to go on. I have Pramodji now. He's going to take over, and then we have Avantika, and then we will open it up for as much. But I promise you, and this evening, bear with me, please, however tired you are, stay alert, stay alive, and we will discuss this in the evening further, because I have also a lot to say. So, and I know Madhu is there with us. Okay. So, please.
So,
Pramodji, we are waiting for you now. Pramodji, please go ahead.
Okay, right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very energetic presentations, first by Sunitaji and then by Madhusudan. There's a lot to discuss, but I think I'll stick to my topic and on the FSI issue to the extent that I know about that and can speak on that. I would be talking later on during the question answer session, if there's a time. Am I audible there?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, right. Because I can't see myself here on this on the screen for some reason. Maybe too many participants are on this link. So I just assume that I'm being heard, and in case there is a problem, please shout from the other side because I can't see you. So let me just quickly go through that. This presentation, mine is essentially I'm presenting a brief PowerPoint on the challenge of meeting India's fast-growing wood demand. Now, the current annual wood demand is around 60 million cubic meter, whereas the production of roundwood, this is the annual demand expressed in the roundwood terms. As you know, what we use is a sawn wood, and then there is a wastage involved in that. Then you make a cut pieces and such. So about 30% or less would be actually reaching the hands of the consumers. But this is in the roundwood terms. The total production of roundwood in India is around 47 million cubic meter currently, of which 45 million cubic meter comes from the trees outside forest, and only 2 million cubic meter comes from state forests. Now, we have been importing the remaining about 13 odd million cubic meter comes from imports, and this is in the form of largely, there are other things, but they are largely pulp. Pulp is about let's say $500 million in 2019. In 2020 is slightly less, but will again pick up. And wood and other wood products are about $2 billion. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, right. Thank you very much. This gives the overall picture in wood demand estimates between 2016 to 2020 and projections from 2021 to 2030 in roundwood equivalent. This is from the work that I and a colleague of mine, Raman Nautiyal, we had done that for the ITTO, the International Tropical Timber Organization, and this has been published by them. So this is an estimate and projection given from that particular paper of ours. In this, you can see the paper and pulp demand is about 12.5, almost constant. This is actually the consumption is increasing, but largely the increase is being met from the recycling, because the government of India has now, the state governments and government of India have the incentives for reusing, and that is what is leading to this. This is a very successful thing. Even though the actual demand is is increasing, but what is coming from the wood remains the same. The more of the additional demand is being met from the recycling. Look at the furniture aspect here. You can see clearly increase already, and also projected increase is also substantial. Primarily, you can see that this is something that you also notice around you, not something which will come to you as a surprise. Look at the panel and plywood. You see a huge jump from 9.44 million cubic meter in terms of the roundwood equivalent, and projected by 2030 57.499 million cubic meters, because this is a real increase which is coming up in this. There is a shift towards preferences for plywood and other material rather than the solid wood. across the country. And in the construction, on the other hand, you see almost reducing constantly, and by the end of 2030, it is expected to be half of what it was in 2016, just about 15 odd million cubic meter. And the total demand in 2016 was 58 million cubic meter, 59, and in 2030 it would be about 100 million cubic meter. So a massive increase is projected. Can we go to the next one, please? Yeah, thank you. This is the domestic wood production and international trade. The roundwood from the state-owned forest is about, it has remained the same, 2.1, around 2 million cubic meter. Roundwood from trees outside forest, you can see that they are much less, but they produce much more. It's not surprising because they do not serve the ecological services as much as the government forests, state-owned forests are expected to do. So they produce about 46 odd million cubic meter. And then you have the imports. Imports are around 5 to 4, and they are now 5 to 4, around 4 to 5 million cubic meter. Quite large amount of that, and which comes from Africa, from Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, also comes from Papua New Guinea, and quite a large amount also from Canada and New Zealand. I was reading a report by Shuchita Jha in Down to Earth, and she has done an excellent work and an outstanding report that is. But she calls the timber which is coming from Africa and Southeast Asia as of doubtful origin, whereas the what is coming from South Africa, from New Zealand, and from Canada is somehow seen as white timber. Very legitimate timber. We can discuss that later on. It is not that legitimate as it may appear to us to be. So, and what comes from Africa and from Southeast Asia is not all that black that it may appear to be or is being projected as. But otherwise, Shuchita's report I am completely in agreement with. Then the other imports we can leave the minor one. You look at the veneer sheet imports because we need more plywood. So we actually are importing veneer. Then fiberboard. They are quite large in number. They are expressed in million kilograms. Then look at the pulp imported, sulfate pulp. There are two types, sulfate and sulfide. Basically, the acidic medium and the base medium that you can leave. But we are basically importing sulfate pulp, which is quite a large amount that you can see, 735 million kilograms. Then you also look at export, because we also export quantities are small, as you can see here. So we can kind of ignore that, but broadly you get the picture of what we are importing and what we are exporting. Next, please. Trade in teak is something which must interest us all. In 2009, we were getting about roundwood equivalent of 5 lakh cubic meter, and by 2019 it was almost double. So there is a quite a substantial amount of import which is coming up in teak, mostly from Myanmar and also from Thailand and Indonesia. Then export is not really much, it's a small quantity. Next one, please. ISFR, we have discussed that, and I very much, there's areas of agreement with what Sunita ji was saying, slightly less so with what Mr. Madhusudan was saying. But anyway, we can discuss that separately. My point here is limited to talking on the growing stock. The growing stock is essentially what is living in the forest, trees, not the bushes and such. So what is living and growing, the trees. The total volume of that is about approximately 4,388 million cubic meter in forest and about 1,080 billion cubic meters, 1,800 billion cubic meters in trees outside forest. And that India's forest and tree cover has been steadily increasing, even if, even after listening to Mr. Madhusudan, you might still agree that they are overall, with whatever definition that we have, definitional issues are certainly are there, very much there. We can discuss that later on. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide, please.
Next.
Yeah. Right. No.
No.
Please go back. Can you go back again?
Go back, Subramanian.
Yeah, sorry, I just missed it. Yeah, now go to the next one, please. Right. Now, please remain here. So, decline in the wood production from the government forest. As I said earlier, 2 million cubic meters from the government forest, which is a large area, but much more from the trees outside forest. Decline in production is due to increased focus on conservation on forest under the National Forest Policy and under various Supreme Court orders. There are various bans which are there, many for very legitimate reason at that time. The reasons may be less legitimate now for the continuance, and we will discuss that shortly. There's the decline I have given here. I think we can skip that because we can go for more discussions later on. But this decline is sharp from 1991 to 2000 as a result of the policy and the Supreme Court orders. Next slide, please. Increasing growing stock. Yeah, right. Now look at this thing. And I'm sure you would, nobody would have, there was a question which I heard with interest whether there is ground truthing is being done or not. Yes, the ground truthing is actually done, and done very, very sincerely across the country by people from the Forest Department and also from the SFR, the Forest Survey of India, FSI. And this growing stock is a assessment is a result of that, of course, combined with there's a very elaborate system of sampling which is done across the country. And some of you actually should go with the Forest Department to these sites, because these sites are permanent sites. The sampling areas are permanent sites and can be also checked, and or just instead of saying checking, just go and visit that, and you would be a great learning experience. You can see from ISFR 2013, there is a continuous increase from then to now, as you can see here, 4,173 million cubic meter in 2013, and now 4,388 million cubic meters. If you see the last 2 years, an increase of 104 million cubic meters between 2019 report and 2021 report. Now, let's take half the areas ecologically too sensitive. Wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, too steep areas, very hilly areas, and this and that, and you keep that out. Half you keep out. 52 is still there. Even 52 also half you keep out for other reasons. Maybe not available, maybe it should not be done, maybe it is close to the river and such. Another half you take out. So 26 million cubic meter. If you take 26 million cubic meter over 2 years, so half of that would be 13 million cubic meters. So 13 million cubic meters, in my view, can be actually harvested. And why harvesting? There was the Sundarji spoke of the agendas. I don't agree with her overall assessment of the ISF, the Forest Survey report, the ISFR. There are areas on which I differ, but certainly the agenda that she has spoken of, I'm in complete agreement with that. Agenda 1, Agenda 2, Agenda 3. And Agenda 3, this sustainable harvesting, besides the reason that she enumerated, is also very important from the point of view of protecting forest, because today under the forests are becoming more vulnerable now, and they're vulnerable to insect attack. Vast areas in USA are under attack by bark beetle. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next, yeah. Please look at this thing. You can see these the conifers in this is a photo from USA, and you see the large attacks, concentrated attack by the insects. These trees die quickly, and when they die, they are dead, standing fuel, huge fuel standing dead. And then when there is electricity discharged from the clouds, these get burnt. And then that is why you are getting so much fire there. So enormous amount of damage is happening because of the changing climate, more insect attack, more diseases in the forest. And unless these are tackled quickly, that is the infested trees are removed from there quickly, as quickly as possible, and also the availability of the water, the competition between trees is to be reduced. So harvesting followed by assisted natural regeneration, the same thing as Sunita ji was saying, cut, regrow, cut and regrow. And so you have to cut appropriately what is to be cut, very clearly marking the trees to be felled, not just general cutting as they do in New Zealand and Canada and many other countries, cutting millions of hectares. No, very clearly these trees have to be marked as to which is to be felled and then removed. This is a massive work which will actually create employment in the villages, in the very remote rural areas. And besides the harvesting, the thinning process also. You don't take the larger one, you thinning. In the harvesting, you take generally the trees which are larger sized. In thinning, you may remove even smaller sized trees also, because the idea is to create space between the trees so that the competition for water and for nutrition between them gets reduced. Now, very interesting thing which has happened in USA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has just been approved by the US Congress. The US President has to still to approve that. Is expected to happen very soon, within a day or two. And this is to create one of the heaviest investment in infrastructure. And in that, they have also kept $5.16 billion for hazardous fuel reduction. The same thing which I am talking, the trees that you see around here are to be removed. And this would create, in US also, it's supposed to create, is expected to create a very large number of new jobs. Next, please. Right. So just the last concluding remarks. We can sharply reduce our growing dependence on wood imports by sustainable harvesting in a state forest. And in the process, we also will be able to remove the dead and dying trees, will increase resilience of forest against fires, and will create rural jobs in areas where they are really needed, and boost rural economy. So thank you very much, and open to question now or later on.
Thank you, Pramod ji. Thank you very much. Fascinating. I think we are really enriched by different perspectives. I'm going to ask my colleague Avantika to jump in quickly. And I have requested her to keep it to the headline news. And she's done huge amount of work, but she'll keep it to headline news and then be available for further questions later on. And for the moment, Sukanya, can you open her presentation? And then we will have some time for questions, but I know that given the level of what you have heard today, the richness of what you've heard today, we probably need a whole evening on this. So we will spend that time. At the moment, because Pramod ji has to go, and he's not here with us, I will ask for specific questions to him in particular after Avantika's talk. Go ahead. It's a totally different perspective. Now you're listening to forests and climate change and the connection there.
So, hi everybody, good morning. And I'm introducing myself again to those of you who weren't there on day one. I'm Avantika Goswami. I'm from the Climate Change Program at CSE. So I can see everyone's experiencing the mid-morning lull. So please bear with me, the last presentation of this panel. So I'm going to be talking about forests as well, but from a zoomed out, more of a macro view, looking at forests as carbon sinks. Looking at their absorptive capacity for pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So this is part of these are the insights from a discussion paper I've been working on with Sunita ji. And we started off with a few key questions. So we wanted to know why forests are important for combating climate change, where the major forest sinks are, and a few other questions that I will touch upon. So getting into the first question. So most of you who have been working in climate change policy and negotiations since the early 1990s, you'll be familiar with the Kyoto Protocol. Before that, the UNFCCC talked about the role of carbon sinks. So land as a whole, of which forests are just one biome, land is both a source as well as a sink for carbon dioxide emissions. And currently about 30% of the human emitted carbon dioxide emissions are absorbed by land. Within this, the largest fraction of that is absorbed by forests within land. So every year, forests around the world absorb about 7.6 gigatons or billion tons of carbon dioxide. And thus, forests are the largest component of the land carbon sink. So where are the major forest carbon sinks around the world? The tropical forests, which are mostly concentrated in Brazil, in Central Africa, and in Southeast Asia, mainly Indonesia. These are the biggest stores of carbon in the world. And these are followed by temperate and boreal forests. But tropical forests are also the biomes experiencing the highest deforestation rates. So if you see in red, the areas with the highest concentration of tropical forests have experienced the highest decreases in carbon stock over the period of 1990 to 2020. And this is driven by trade, by agricultural commodity growing, mainly beef and oilseeds. So as a result of this, extremely important carbon sinks of the world, like the Amazon, for example, is now considered a carbon source because it has been deforested to such a vast extent. So then we come to our next question. Why are we talking about forest sinks with a renewed interest? They were mentioned earlier. In the early 1990s, the UNFCCC recognized the role of land as a carbon sink, like I mentioned earlier. The Kyoto Protocol then wanted to go a step further and use emission removals from carbon sink as a way to compensate for fossil fuel emissions, the whole offsetting angle. Ever since then, there has been various initiatives, various alliances, announcements, which are looking at preserving forests, enhancing forests. The most recent one took place at COP26. I know some of you here were present and reporting from there. The Glasgow Declaration of Forests was signed by over 140 countries. So why has this momentum built up over the past few years? So one milestone is the IPCC's 2018 report, the special report on 1.5 C of warming, which basically said that the world must achieve net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. So this was picked up as a sign by both countries as well as the private sector. How can we achieve net zero emissions? And net zero essentially means that the carbon dioxide you are emitting is balanced out by carbon dioxide that is being absorbed or sequestered. Now, the right way to do this, the right way to achieve net zero is to make every effort to reduce your carbon emissions first. And whatever is difficult to reduce, let's say hard to abate sectors like shipping, aviation, etc., you then use methods like certain technologies or forest sinks to absorb that excess carbon. But of course, that's not the reality of how net zero has been interpreted. The technologies and natural sinks have been treated as a shortcut method for countries as well as private companies to not put in adequate efforts to reduce their emissions first. So a number of new terms have now come into popular lexicon. So you have nature-based solutions, natural climate solutions, land-based mitigation. And while each of these terms have its own nuances, they, in some form or the other, refer to the act of using forests as carbon sinks. So another kind of milestone that has propagated this interest is the findings from the scientific community. So we assessed 13 studies which have all been published in the past 5 years, so 2017 onwards. And each of these studies has produced mitigation potential of land. So mitigation potential, in very simple terms, refers to how much carbon dioxide land can absorb. And although these studies vary widely in their assumptions, their inputs, their time horizons, they all agree that forests are amongst the cheapest mitigation strategies as compared to using technologies like direct air capture or carbon capture and storage to draw down carbon. And all of the resulting potential that they have identified, which is in the last column here, is overtly optimistic. So one of the most widely known studies talks about how forests and land can provide up to 37% of the mitigation that we need to limit temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius. So that's a pretty big number, and it's obviously expected to generate quite a lot of excitement. So as a result of those optimistic scientific estimates and the IPCC report, countries have also included land and forest sinks in their NDCs, which are submitted, the pledges they have submitted under the Paris Agreement. And they're also including them in their net zero plans. So major countries who have set net zero targets have provisions for either afforestation, forest restoration, wetlands restoration, mangrove expansion, and so on. India, in its original NDC submitted in 2015, has a goal on carbon sinks. What's interesting to note is that the announcement made at COP26, where India said they will achieve net zero emissions by 2070, the carbon sink goal was not reiterated. But the NDC still stands, of course. So one assumes that we are still working towards achieving that particular goal. Another thing this has done, this over-optimism in the belief that forests will save us, is it has led to an explosion of the offsets market. So this falls under the big, messy, complex area of carbon markets. But essentially, offsetting means that any polluting activity can be neutralized by planting a few trees somewhere else or building a renewable energy project somewhere else. And there are multiple problems with this concept, which I won't get into right now. But the optimism is such that it's speculated. So first of all, the carbon credits associated with forests, these rose from 5% of all carbon credits in the carbon market in 2010 to 40% in 2021. So there's been a huge explosion in forestry-based carbon credits. And the speculation and the bullish sentiments associated with them are now saying that more than half of carbon offsets will come from forests by 2030, and that the market will increase 15-fold. So the demand for offsets will increase 15 times by that period. So that's obviously expected to generate a lot. That excitement is intended to generate further demand as well. Most of the projects for these forest offset projects are, forest carbon offsets are located in the global south. So again, areas where major tropical forests are, but also areas where some of the poorest people live. So that brings us to our final two questions, which are possibly the biggest and the most messy questions. So this is just a quick summary of all the issues that we identified. This forms the bulk of our paper. So firstly, forests are not permanent. Forests can be destroyed by fires, by deforestation, by drought. So if you are trying to plant a forest to capture carbon, that carbon is not permanently locked away. If it's if it's kept in the ground where coal, oil, and gas exist beneath the surface of the earth, it's locked away permanently. So you are putting that carbon, taking it out from permanent reserves and pushing it into something that is very unstable and prone to destruction. And the whole idea here is to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So that's our goal. Secondly, forests today sequester only about 7.6 billion tons per year. Our emissions from fossil fuels itself are 33 gigatons or 33 billion tons per year. So there is no way we can grow enough forests to soak up all of our fossil fuel emissions. The land sink is also extremely uncertain. There is a lot of disagreement between the models used to estimate the forest sink. Models disagree with on-ground observations because of differences in methodology and all kinds of other logistical challenges. So if you can't measure something adequately, how are you going to develop a coherent mitigation policy around it? Excess dependence on afforestation is also threatening food security, because if you are setting aside more land for plantations or for reforestation, you are taking away land used for food production. So it's been estimated that 41.9 million people could be put at risk of hunger globally in 2050 because food prices will rise because food production land will be taken away. Land sinks, like forests, are also weakened by climate change. So repeated droughts, repeated fire, all have impacts on the absorption capacity of forests. So as climate change worsens, the land sink will continue to become weaker. Then these 2 points here are more of a monitoring reporting issue. So again, if we are trying to develop a coherent global policy on using forest sinks, you have to have transparent data, you have to have consistent data. But currently, the country reports of forest emissions and absorption of carbon dioxide differ widely from what scientists using global models are estimating. This difference is not small. There's a difference of 5.5 gigatons per year, which is about the emissions of the United States, differing between what countries are measuring ground up versus what global models are estimating from top down. So that's another issue. Countries are also using what we are calling creative accounting. So for example, Russia has a huge amount of land area under forests, but it's also one of the major emitters of fossil fuel emissions. But Russia has conveniently said that they can offset up to 38% of their fossil fuel emissions from their forests. So basically, we don't need to make any efforts to reduce our emissions right now because our forests are cleaning everything up for us. So that's creative accounting, which reduces accountability on part of countries to make more efforts. Ownership of land and forests, a major issue discussed both in India and abroad. There's a concept called green grabbing, where for more afforestation projects, land is taken away from indigenous communities, tribal communities, and multiple other human rights abuses can occur in the process. And lastly, coming back to, again, the fact that the offsets market is exploding now, the private sector is pumping millions of dollars into purchasing offsets. So all of the issues mentioned above will become even worse potentially unless this market is regulated and reined in. So India has a carbon sink goal, which has been discussed, debated by many of you here, as well as I think experts across. India aims to create an additional sink of 2.5 to 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030. So there are multiple questions around this goal. Whether that's by intention or unintentional, we won't be able to say. But one of the main questions the FSI has posed itself in a technical paper in 2019 is why a baseline year has not been set for this particular goal. If we want to increase the sink by 2.5 to 3 gigatons, what are we measuring it against? So off the record, we've heard it's supposed to be 2005, but that's not been officially communicated. The FSI also questioned whether the additional sink will be above the business as usual level versus an ongoing trend. So that's something I can get into separately offline. What we have a question at CSE is, Why are we measuring this only in terms of additional carbon stock of forest and tree cover? That's how progress is currently being mentioned as per the FSI's documents. But we believe that we should also be measuring it in relation to how much of our greenhouse gas emissions are being offset by our carbon sink. So the additionality of the carbon sink should also bring in greenhouse gas emissions into the indicator to measure progress. So the FSI is projecting that our carbon stock will increase to 31.87 billion tons by 2030. And this is fairly optimistic. It looks quite rosy. And that would be higher than 28.12 billion tons in 2005, which means that this goal technically can be met if we use that interpretation. But in reality, although forest and tree cover is increasing, the carbon stock of India has been contested. Numbers on the carbon stock. The FSI is reporting that carbon stock has been increasing from the previous year in every assessment. But independent studies have contested this because our natural forests are degrading and plantations are increasing. And we've heard earlier, plantations are not as competent in carbon sequestration capacity as natural forests. So our carbon stock projections are most likely overestimated. And in fact, even the official FSI numbers show that a number of states are decreasing in their carbon stock. So it's estimated that about 300 million people in India depend on forests for their livelihoods. Now, if we are planning to reforest or afforest on that scale, we will need land. But land has other uses. It's used for food production. It's used for livelihoods and crops. A recent estimate has mapped out the sequestration potential of India's forests across the states. And it finds that if you only narrow down to land which is available and not used for any other productive purpose, the available land can be reforested, but it will meet only 7% of India's carbon sink pledge through forest restoration. Any additional land that you try to reforest on or afforest on, you are then running into issues of land tenure, historical land use legacies. There are users of that land. There are people subsiding, depending on that land for their livelihoods. And some of the highest potential has been found in central India. So almost done here. So the questions that we raised right at the beginning have mostly been answered by the scientific community and by observations on the ground, but many questions still remain. Specifically, what will happen to the lands of forest-dwelling communities? Will their lands be taken over? Will they be compensated? Secondly, how do we prevent these perverse incentives where forest sinks disincentivize countries from reducing their emissions, disincentivize companies from reducing their emissions and relying on offsets? So how do we address that challenge? And lastly, for India, we need much more clarity on the carbon sink goal. And our afforestation strategy must account for the needs of forest-dwelling communities and the poorest, without which any nature-based solution approach will not be successful.
Thank you, Avantika. Sorry, brilliant, very nice, very, very nice. But we really, so what I'm going to do, and please bear with me, don't kill me. Keep your questions for the evening. I'm going to ask Pramod ji is not going to be with us. Madhu, you're there this evening, right? So this fire started. Pramod ji, sir, he's not there in the evening. So what I want is questions addressed to him right now. And if we take those for the next 50-20 minutes, we will cut into tea, but not so much. Okay, we'll all, yes. So let's start. So Pramod ji, yes, please, Jai. Introduce yourself to him. Pramod ji, we are going to get questions now. You're on mute, I think. No? Some problem? I think his mic, it was working very well earlier. Nahin, Pramod ji, kuch aap utar dijiye. I think take that off. Sometimes the headphones don't work.
Is it okay?
Perfect.
Yeah, you are audible.
Perfect. Yes. Jaideep.
Okay, fine. Then this was the problem, huh?
So the questions are beginning.
Pramod ji, I'm Jaideep Devgharia from
Okay,
Times of
fine.
India. I would like to understand from you, like what we could understand that the process, how is the tree counting or forest counting, how is it done? Because is it only satellite, as you were telling that no ground verification is also done? And in that case, why is this disparity? Or is there the problem with the definition of forest? You have been with the department for a long time, so you can tell us clearly that why this disparity appears.
Right. My answers would be kind of unofficial because I am not associated with the FSI directly now and not worked there. I have only been reading and interacting with them outside. So it is a kind of outsider job that I'm doing. Yes, after the satellite, you get the satellite images and the satellite data, and you also do the ground truthing. There are, I think, 30,000. My numbers may be slightly off this way, not too much. 30,000, around 30,000 sampling plots, out of which almost 10,000 are in the forest area. 9,600, 9,700 are in the forest area, and the remaining are spread outside the TOF. So sampling of the TOF, trees outside forest, and sampling of the areas inside. These are permanent sample plots, which means, and they are their let long is their physical presence is very much located. They can be located anytime easily. These are then the statistical sampling is done in these areas, in these sample plots. And for trees, each of these trees are counted, measured, and then the growing stock is found. For the growing stock, there is also sampling for the total amount of the tree cover. So when you do the tree cover, you take the crown. So crown of the trees. So you see the 10%, how much in a, let's say, 1 hectare area, you have 1 hectare area. In the 1 hectare area, how much is covered by the crown? And in that crown, you have the assessment from the imagery, the data that has been collected, and one you do there exactly on the site. And that is then reported back from all the sample plots. So that way this work is done. This work of adjusting the values from what you get from satellites and for what you get from here, that is assessed. What was the other part of the question?
Pramodji, I want to also add to the second question that Jaideep had, because you said you partly agree with me, and I want to push you on that, because the fact is that if you agree with me, then you have to agree with Madhu as well, simply because
no, so there is a
सुन लीजिए मेरा सवाल क्या है. मेरा सवाल यह है कि अगर हमें पेड़ लगाने हैं, और जो मैं बिल्कुल मानती हूँ, आप और मेरी बात उसमें सहमत है कि हमें पेड़ लगाने हैं, काटने हैं, मगर फिर डेफिनेशन भी ठीक करनी पड़ेगी, क्योंकि if you don't fix the definitional issue of what is a forest and what is a plantation even inside a forest, and what is a forest which is not a plantation, then you will invariably make sure that you will have even more problems when you plant trees. So if you agree with me, you have to agree with Madhu as well, as I see it, unless you have a different point of view. Tell us how.
Okay, let me try. The point that I agree with you is, one, there is a definitional aspect which has to be, in my view, also corrected, changed. My is an unofficial view, is not the official view of the department, of the ministry at all. So you see what happened. The whole thing lay in the Supreme Court order at one time, long time back. I think it was 85, 86, around that time. A forest is what looks like a forest, if you recall that. So assessment and the committees across the country were formed, and I was at that time a relatively young officer. I was also young at one time. So I was one of the person who was, asked to make assessment, and our bosses had formed a team, and I was the junior member of the team, and we were asked to take that as a definition. What looks like a forest is a forest.
Wow.
It was Supreme Court order. There were committees across the country which were formed. And in every place, and I was in Tirunelveli at that time in Tamil Nadu, my cadre, and this is what we had worked on. This is actually an extension of that and the FAO's definition, and what just now was stated, I think by you,
Madhu.
by Madhu. Certain other aspects of that which define it further, that it should be this much, it should really this much of height. The height is not 5 meters, height is from 2 to 5 meters. So that depends upon that is is left to the countries, because in some countries trees would never reach the 5-meter height. So the FAO definition says from 2 meter to 5 meter, any height which they decide, the country has to decide. So in the FAO definition also, a lot of leverage is left to the countries, because after all, the trees they grow differently in different ecologies, in different places. And then why 10% is so important? If there is no 10%, or the remain, that is a minimum aspect, not the, as Madhu also was saying, and you also said the same thing. In some areas, you will only get 10% tree cover. You would not get more than tree cover at all. And these are vast areas in Africa, for example. Can you say that they are not forest? They are very much forest. They serve the purpose of forest. They serve the ecological function of forest for those areas, because that depends on the rainfall and also the nutrition in the soils there.
So can I ask Madhu to respond? I'm sorry, people. I'm just forgive me, because I think this conversation is important that we have. So Madhu, I think what Pramodji is saying is that he accepts there is a definitional issue, but he's saying that the FAO definition has to be adapted to different parts of the world, and therefore we have adapted it accordingly. Your view on this? I think we are coming. Please.
Sunita ji, 1 minute, I also wanted to say to where I was in agreement, because there are areas which are lost due to encroachment, very much so. There are areas which have been actually lost for other reasons around the country. So to that extent, I was agreeing with you. So there is a gap. There is definitely a gap.
प्रमोद जी, उसमें तो मैं घुस भी नहीं रही हूँ. वो आपने 26 मिलियन हेक्टेयर तो खो दिए हैं. वो हम लोग अलग से बात करेंगे. ओके, वो अलग से बात करेंगे. बहुत बड़ा सवाल है, मगर इस सवाल को जोड़ना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि प्रमोद जी डेफिनेशन जब तक ठीक नहीं होगी तो वो जमीन मिल भी जाए, उसमें अगर हम लोग कुछ भी लगा दें, वो जंगल है कि क्या है हमें पता नहीं चलेगा. तो मधु, respond to this.
So my broader take is that a forest is a category of land on which you can't maximize anything. You only have options of optimization. You have to optimize against productivity for timber, against capture of carbon, conservation of biodiversity, securing livelihoods. It's the optimization across all of these things. And here, from a biodiversity perspective, what is a natural forest and what is something that can functionally serve as a forest in a multiple set of other ways in terms of capturing carbon or providing timber and all of that is very different. So the FAO's Global Forest Research Assessment makes that distinction, which I think is collectively done by all the countries' representatives on FAO, to separate natural forests and naturally regenerating forests from plantations. That is all I think we need to do to begin with here. And so what kind of a forest is it that, so right now this disaggregation is the most important thing.
Hold on, Pramod ji. So Madhu is saying now, and he's saying is, yes, there is an FAO definition, but forests have a variety of multiple uses, and we must also start recognizing in our definition the differences in that variety of uses. And that is why you cannot mix what is a natural or naturally regenerating forest from what would be a plantation. Would you not agree with this, Pramod?
I'll add one more
Yes,
thing.
I'll
I'll add, sir, I'll just add one more thing. I'll add one more thing so that you can.
Sorry, अब मेरे को लग
So
रहा
the thing
है
is-
मैं अर्नब गोस्वामी बन गई हूँ.
You are perhaps more kind than him.
Please,
So-
Madhu.
So this is not, I think the value of tree covered lands outside, all of those other things need to come in. I think that what is key is that the disaggregation, FAO is very clear that anything that is being grown for agricultural purposes will not count as forest.
Yeah, so do I respond now? Okay, you want me to respond now?
So last word to you on this.
To me?
Yes, Pramod ji.
Okay, right. So that's I could not actually get the point there.
No,
So-
I'll explain. Pramod ji,
Right.
what Madhu is simply saying, he is not disagreeing with the different values that forests have. He is
Right.
saying it's very clear that we need to know and define the different types of values that we are getting from different types of forests. And the FAO definition also makes it clear that you can't combine trees grown on agricultural lands or in urban areas as forests. So essentially what he's saying is
Disaggregate.
all the values are perfect, but disaggregate them and count them correctly. That's what you're saying,
Yes.
right?
I
Pramod
think
ji,
this-
how can you disagree with that? You can't.
No, it is actually difficult to disagree with him on this
Bilkul.
point. But let me say, why it is so difficult. When you do a data collection or a reporting for a country as vast as ours and as varied as ours, you need to make the categories smaller in number. This is the problem essentially, because even with this also, the kind of thing that we have, it is one of the most difficult thing to make this report. I can tell you, I have never worked in FSI myself, but I respect this organization the most in the MOEFs and CC. The one organization which you find working constantly and one of the most devoted department you get that for that. So I mean, I would not like to increase their difficulties even more. What I would like to do, let me just explain that. I would like the state departments to work on it. You have the FSI report. This gives the broader classification. And now within that, it is they who ought to work and then separate out, let's say in Nilgiris, what is a shola forest and what is a grassland by its side. So they must be separated there,
Okay.
categorized differently.
I agree. Madhu, last word to you, then I want the last word. Okay, so.
Sir, I think technically this is a solved problem. It is possible to distinguish multiple kinds of forests. The National Remote Sensing Agency has shown us, the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing with their forest map of 2015 has shown that we can do, they have done over 100 categories. It's possible. It's a solved problem. I think it's not an issue of technical competence at all. I completely concur with you that FSI has definitely, the quality of its work is very good, but I think the motivations that drive it, which are beyond FSI's control, presumably, are really what they have to fight with.
Okay. Pramod ji, I want to take the last word to conclude this. We will continue this conversation in the night. Pramod ji, my biggest problem, and I'll tell you because you and I are on sync on a lot of issues, and I hope you will help me to fight this battle in your community. Okay. So that is why I want you to be my ally. Okay.
Okay.
I'll tell you, Pramod ji, my biggest problem with what the Forest Department has currently done, for any reason, सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कहा, किसी ने कहा, मैं पास्ट में नहीं जा रही हूं, मगर आज की स्थिति ये है प्रमोद जी कि मेरे शहर दिल्ली में अगर सड़क बननी है तो पहले लोग कहते हैं कि जंगल कोई पेड़ मत आने देना आसपास. क्यों? क्योंकि एक सैपलिंग अगर थोड़ा भी मोटा हो जाता है, आप जानते हैं कि एवरी स्टेट हैज अ ट्री प्रोटेक्शन एक्ट, वो थोड़ा सा भी उसकी ग्रिथ बढ़ जाती है तो वो सैपलिंग से पेड़ बन जाता है. पेड़ की परमिशन एलजी देंगे, एलजी कमिटी बैठाएगी, एलजी की कमिटी कभी मिलती नहीं है, वो कमिटी कभी परमिशन नहीं देगी, सड़क नहीं बन सकती. It has become a nightmare. and we are becoming enemies of forests. And because of this also, Pramod ji, we are stopped being able to argue for tree plantation, because people like Madhu very correctly will point out, you don't know it's a plantation or a natural forest. So we have to correct definitions, Pramod ji. We have to be able to distinguish between what's the forest we want to keep, what's the forest we want to cut. And that is absolutely critical. So Pramod ji, I don't have time. I know you're leaving. You also are tough. But this conversation will continue क्योंकि आपको मेरे साथ ally बनके आपकी community के साथ जंग करनी है.
मैं आपके इसमें बिल्कुल I agree with you. I will work with you because I agree with you on this last point.
मिलके बात करेंगे प्रमोद जी. Very good. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Very grateful.
It has been an Arnab Goswami session without all the screaming and shouting. Okay. Thank you, Pramod ji. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very grateful
for this conversation.
You.
Tea is, I think, upstairs. Upstairs. Enjoy the sun, but come back quickly, please. Thank you, Madhu. What did you think of Avantika's session?
Very good.
Tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I think to understand
this thing needed to be clarified is that change from 99 to 2001, was it the FSI which did it on its own, or was it the government company?
तुम भी जानती हो मैं कैसे पूछने
No, why I'm asking this? Because if it was the 99 2001 government, then why was it not rectified in 2004?
Because Jairam Ramesh actually signed off on this definition. आप बात क्या करती हैं निवेदिता? They're all the same. आपको लगता है थोड़ा बहुत लगता है.
Sukanya, we have to upload the presentation, so she'll just upload it. Check it.